Shadows of Elria, The Archon's Vigil. Written by J.T. Williams. Copyright 2025, Dwemer Realms. Chapter 1. Archon Lost. The moonlight never reached the deepest chambers of Mor Nathiel. Here, in the heart of the vampire stronghold, the darkness was absolute. A living thing that breathed and shifted with malevolent purpose. Teuma, High Archon of the Star Song Circle, had not seen true daylight in 27 days. He traced his fingers over the enchanted runes carved into his prison walls, their faint blue luminescence the only light permitted him. The vampires had been thorough in their preparations. The chamber was perfectly circular, the ceiling so high it vanished into darkness, and the walls inscribed with ancient bindings that neutralized his most powerful spells, while allowing just enough magic to keep him alive. An exquisite cage for an exquisite bird. "Still attempting to break my spellwork, Archon?" came the silken voice from the shadows. Teuma didn't turn to face his captor. After 4 weeks of these visits, he had learned that Lady Vesria of the High Lords of Vidia drew satisfaction from watching him jump at her sudden appearances. "The bindings are Dwemer," Teuma replied, continuing his examination. "Modified, but recognizable. I'm simply appreciating the craftsmanship." Vesria laughed, the sound like crystal breaking. "Always the scholar, even in captivity." She glided into the dim circle of runic light, her pale skin almost translucent. Unlike the feral Ikarn that made up most of the vampire forces, the High Lords maintained a terrible beauty. "Soon you'll have eternity to study them, if you wish." "I've declined your offer twice now," Teuma said, finally turning to face her. "Even the most hopeful suitor would take the hint." Vesria smiled, revealing the tips of her fangs. "The offer wasn't mine to make, but Lord Elria's, and he is, persistent in his desires." Teuma felt the familiar chill at the mention of that name. Elria Sonia, a figure of such ancient evil that many believed him to be merely a myth before his recent awakening. The Lord of all vampires. The bite in the dark. "How fares your master's recovery?" Teuma asked, knowing the question would irritate her. "Still struggling after his rude awakening?" A flicker of rage crossed Vesria's perfect features before she composed herself. "Lord Elria grows stronger each day. The sundering spell cast by your pitiful Archon was powerful, but ultimately futile." Teuma allowed himself a small smile. "And yet your forces withdrew from Halfviren, from Lufgin, from the borders of Sailmark. Curious strategy for an army on the brink of victory." Vesria's hand moved faster than mortal eyes could track, seizing Teuma's throat and slamming him against the wall. The runes fled in protest but did not stop her physical strength. "We withdrew to prepare," she hissed, her face inches from his. "When we strike next, there will be no retreats, no survivors. Just the eternal night that was always meant to be." "Fascinating," Teuma admitted, despite her grip. "But if Lord Elria is so powerful, why does he need me?" Her grip loosened slightly. "He doesn't need you," she said, stepping back. "He desires you. There's a difference. And that difference is? Need is practical. Desire is..." She paused, searching for the word. "Personal." Teuma knew why Elria wanted him, of course. As one of the oldest living Archons, his knowledge of ancient magic was surpassed only by the High Archons of Sailmark itself. But, more than that, he had been there, at the Battle of Twin Rivers, where the Rangers of the North had broken from the King of Tyria. He had been privy to secrets that few still living remembered. "I'll never serve him," Teuma said. "You can keep me here until the stars fade, but I will not bend." "Ha! Who said anything about bending?" Vesria replied, examining her long pale fingers. Breaking is so much more satisfying. She crossed to the chamber's single piece of furniture, a small table carved from obsidian, and uncovered a crystal decanter filled with a dark liquid. "Wine from the vineyards of Wehrmacht," she said, pouring a single glass. "From before the war. I thought you might appreciate a taste of home." Teuma didn't move. "I haven't consumed food or drink in days. Why start now?" "Because, dear Archon," she said, extending the glass, "tonight is special. Lord Elleria wishes to meet you, and one should never meet the Lord of all vampires with a parched throat." A chill settled into Ma's bones. In all his weeks of captivity, he had been spared the presence of Elria Sonia himself. The implications were clear. The vampire lord must have recovered enough strength to take a more direct interest in his prisoners. "And if I refuse this audience?" Teuma asked. Vesriel's smile widened. "Then I'll be forced to bring in the rangers we captured near the wall last week. Young ones. Still full of hope." She tilted her head. "I've been saving them for a special occasion, but they would serve as adequate appetizers." Teuma closed his eyes briefly. Another of their games. Truth and lies, interwoven so tightly that separating them was nearly impossible. Were there truly captured rangers, or was it merely a bluff to force his compliance? Either way, he couldn't take the risk. "Most should never refuse an invitation from one's host," he said, accepting the glass. The wine was exquisite, a bitter reminder of the world above. "A wise choice," Vesperia said. "Lord Elria appreciates wisdom. It's rare in mortals these days." "Almost as rare as honor among vampires," Teuma retorted. Vesperia laughed. "Oh, I've missed the elven wit. The Icarn make for dull conversation partners." She gestured to the chamber door, which swung open silently. "Shall we?" Teuma had been permitted outside his cell only once before, when they first brought him to Mornathil. The corridors of the vampire stronghold were a bewildering labyrinth of dark stone and twisted architecture, as though the mountain itself had been warped by the evil that dwelled within it. 2 Icarn guards fell into step behind them as Vesria led the way. These were not the mindless thralls that made up the bulk of vampire forces, but elite guards with intelligence still burning in their blood-red eyes. Their armor, forged from some black metal Teuma didn't recognize, seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. "The fortress has an interesting design," Teuma said as they passed through a hall where the ceiling arched down to meet the floor before rising again in impossible angles. "Mornathil was not built," Vesria replied. "It was grown. Lord Elia shaped the very rock with his will when he first established his domain, before the wars with the elves. And from the Hour Club, before your kind was banished to the Shadow Realm," Teuma added. Vesria's pace didn't falter. "A temporary setback. The natural order is being restored, Archon. The Blackmoon heralds our ascendancy. They descended a spiral staircase that seemed to go on forever, the air growing colder with each step. Finally, they emerged into a vast cavern where the walls glittered with veins of some dark crystal. At the center stood a raised dais surrounded by pools of still black water. "Wait here," Vesperia instructed the guards, who took positions at the entrance. She led Teuma across a narrow bridge to the dais. As they approached, Teuma noticed a figure seated on a throne of the same black crystal that lined the walls. Despite the distance, he could feel the weight of the ancient vampire's gaze upon him. "My lord," Vesria said, bowing deeply, "I present Teuma, High Archon of the Star Song Circle, as requested." The figure on the throne remained motionless for a long moment. Then, with an almost imperceptible gesture, he dismissed Vesria, who bowed again and retreated across the bridge. Teuma stood alone before Eliasonia, lord of all vampires. "Approach, Archon," came the voice, a whisper that somehow filled the entire cavern. Teuma steeled himself and climbed the steps to the dais. In the dim light, he could finally see his captor clearly. Eliasonia bore little resemblance to his vampire subjects. Where they appeared as twisted reflections of the mortal races, he seemed almost elemental, a being of shadow and malice given physical form. His skin was alabaster white, stretched taut over sharp features. His eyes were completely black, without pupil or iris. Instead of the flowing robes favored by the Vadir lords, he wore a simple garment of some material that seemed to shift between solid and smoke. "You have been a guest in my domain for some time," Illyria said, his voice still a haunting whisper. "Yet this is our first meeting. I trust my servants have treated you with appropriate respect. If imprisonment is your idea of respect, then yes," Teuma replied, determined to show no fear. Elria's lips curved in what might have been a smile. "For one of your stature? Absolutely. Lesser beings would be serving a purpose in my feeding chambers by now. How merciful of you." "Mercy is not my concern," Erlia said. "Value, however, is. And you, Archon, have tremendous value." Teuma felt a cold pressure against his mind, gentle but insistent, like a frozen tide lapping at the shores of his consciousness. He reinforced his mental barriers, drawing on centuries of arcane discipline. "Your resistance is impressive," Elria commented. "Most minds yield to my touch instantly." "I've had practice," Teuma said. "Your kind aren't the only ones who seek knowledge not freely given." "No," Elia agreed. "But we are the most persistent." He leaned forward slightly. "I could break your defenses, of course, shatter your mind like glass, and extract what I need. But the process would destroy much of what makes you valuable. How considerate of you to refrain." Elria rose from his throne with fluid grace. Despite his weakened state, power radiated from him in palpable waves. "Walk with me, Archon," he said, descending the dais steps. With little choice, Teuma followed. They circled the dais, approaching one of the black pools. "Do you know what these are?" Elria asked, gesturing to the still water. Teuma studied the surface. It appeared completely opaque, reflecting nothing. "Scrying pools," he ventured. "Or perhaps portals." "Both, in a sense," Illyria said. "They allow me to observe and, when necessary, influence events throughout my domain, which is expanding by the day." He passed his hand over the nearest pool and the surface rippled. An image formed, a section of the Great Wall being constructed between southern Tyria and the mountains. Rangers patrolled its length, while dwarven engineers worked to strengthen its defenses. "Your allies believe this wall will protect them," Elias said, his voice tinged with amusement. "Stone and mortar against the tide of night. It will slow your forces," Teuma pointed out. "Briefly," Elia conceded. "But walls can be undermined. Gods can be corrupted. Hope," he waved his hand, and the image changed to show a burning village, "can be extinguished." Teuma recognized the settlement, a small farming community near the borders of Bivalik. He had passed through it many times during his journeys. "That was 3 days ago," Elrio said, reading Teuma's expression. "My Ikon left no survivors." Teuma forced himself to show no reaction. "If you're trying to break my spirit with displays of your cruelty, you'll be disappointed." "No cruelty," Illyria corrected. "Necessity. The mortal races must understand that resistance only prolongs their suffering." He moved to another pool, summoning a new image. This time, Teuma saw the familiar spires of Salmark, gleaming in the distance. "Your greatest stronghold," Elias said. "The jewel of the elven kingdoms. I remember when it was nothing but a collection of wooden huts clustered around a Dwinhaw ruin." A casual reminder of Elria's age sent a chill through Teuma. The vampire lord had witnessed the rise and fall of civilizations, had seen empires crumble to dust. "It will not fall," Teuma said, with more confidence than he felt. "Everything falls, Archon," Elria replied. "It's simply a matter of time and pressure." He studied the image with an almost wistful expression. "But Selmark holds particular interest for me." "And what interest would that be?" Teuma asked carefully. "The elves of Selmark know what they have hidden beneath their city," Elria said, his black eyes fixed on Teuma. Teuma kept his expression neutral. "Many things lie beneath Selmark. You'll have to be more specific." Elria's eyes narrowed. "Do not test my patience, Archon. I know you were present at the sealing. You were one of 3 Archons who performed the ritual. The other 2 are long dead." Teuma couldn't entirely hide his surprise. Few outside the highest circles of elven society even knew of that secret. "Your spies are well informed," he said carefully. "Not spies," Elria corrected. "Memories. The blood remembers, Archon. Every drop consumed carries fragments of its former owner's knowledge. Over centuries, these fragments form a mosaic." The implications were horrifying. How many elves had died to provide these fragments of memory? How many secrets had been pieced together from the blood of the fallen? "Even if such treasures exist," Teuma said, "why would you believe I could help you obtain them? The seals on Dwemha artifacts are bound to blood and starlight." "Precisely," Elrian said, returning to his throne. "Blood and starlight. I have plenty of the former, but the latter requires a more specialized touch." He settled onto his throne. "An Archon's touch." Teuma understood now. Elrian needed him not just for his knowledge, but for his very essence. The connection to the stars that all Archons cultivated throughout their centuries of study. "I will never help you access these artifacts," Teuma said firmly. "No?" Elria asked, his voice dangerously soft. "Not even to save your kind from extinction?" He gestured to the pool again, and the image changed once more. This time, it showed a vast underground chamber filled with row upon row of strange crystalline structures. Within each crystal, a figure was suspended. Elves, humans, dwarves, all perfectly preserved like insects in amber. "My harvesting chambers," Illyrio explained, "currently holding over 1,000 souls. Some are kept for feeding, others for more specialized purposes." "You're a monster," Teuma whispered. "I am a necessity," Illyrio countered. "A counterbalance to the tyranny of the sun. For too long, the mortal races have dominated these lands, believing themselves the rightful inheritors of a world they barely understand." He rose again, descending the steps until he stood directly before Teuma. "I offer you a choice, Archon. Aid me in accessing the Dwemha artifacts beneath Selmark, and I will spare the city. Resist, and I will turn it into a feeding ground that will make the sack of Hakinok seem merciful by comparison." Teuma met the vampire lord's black gaze. "Even if I believed you would honor such a bargain, which I don't, I would never betray my people." Elria studied him for a long moment. "Your loyalty is admirable, if misplaced. But consider this. The artifacts contain immense power, yes, but also knowledge. Knowledge that could end this conflict before it consumes everything you hold dear. Wait, what knowledge could possibly justify such betrayal?" Teuma asked. "The truth about the Black Moon," Elria replied. its purpose, its power, its price.
Despite himself, Teuma felt a flicker of curiosity. The Black Moon's sudden appearance had puzzled even the eldest Archons. Its connection to the vampire resurgence was clear, but the deeper mysteries remained unsolved. The Dwemhar understood the cycle of the moons better than any race before or since, Illyria continued. They left records, prophecies, some would call them, about the convergence we now witness. And you expect me to believe that you seek this knowledge for some greater good? Teuma asked skeptically. I seek it for survival, Aaliyah said bluntly. Mine, my kind, and yes, potentially yours as well. What do you mean? Ilaria turned away, gazing into the black pools. The Black Moon is not merely a celestial event, Archon. It is a harbinger. And what follows may consume us all if not properly understood and accommodated. For the first time, Teuma sensed something beyond the cold malice that defined the vampire lord. Was it fear? Surely not. What could possibly frighten a being of such ancient power? You speak in riddles, Teuma said. Clarity would require context you do not possess, Illyria replied. Context that lies beneath Sailmark. He returned to his throne. I will give you 3 days to reconsider your position. Use them to reflect on what is truly at stake. With a gesture, he summoned Vestria, who materialized from the shadows as though she had been waiting there all along. Return our guest to his chambers, Illyria instructed. Ensure he has everything needed for proper reflection. Vizria bowed. As you wish, my lord. As Teuma was led away, he felt Ilvria's gaze following him. Ancient, calculating, and tinged with something that unsettled him more than any threat could have. Urgency. The walk back to his prison seemed shorter than the journey down. Teuma's mind raced, analyzing every word, every nuance of his conversation with Elria Sonia. Something had changed in the Vampire Lord's strategy. The direct threat against Salmark was new, but more concerning was the implication that there was something beyond even Elria's control. Something connected to the Black Moon. You're unusually quiet, Archon, Vespria observed, as they approached his chamber. Processing the honor of an audience with your master, Teemu replied dryly. Vesria's lips curved in a humorless smile. Did he offer you the bargain? You knew he would. I suggested it, she admitted. Lord Elrian's patience with conventional warfare is limited. The secrets beneath Sailmark offer a more direct path to our goals. And what goals are those, exactly? Teuma asked. Beyond the obvious bloodshed and domination. They reached his chamber. The runic doorway pulsed with blue light, recognizing its prisoner's return. Survival, as he said, Vespera replied. Though perhaps not in the form you imagine. Before Teuma could question her further, she gestured him inside. 3 days, Archon. Consider your answer carefully. The door sealed behind him, leaving Teuma alone with his thoughts and the soft blue glow of his prison runes. Heath crossed to the far wall, where a small alcove contained the few possessions they had allowed him to keep. A silver pendant bearing his family's crest, a simple wooden flute, and a small journal with enchanted pages that never ran out of space for his writings. He took the journal and seated himself cross-legged on the floor. For hours, he recorded every detail of his meeting with Ilya Sonia, analyzing each statement, each implication. Something about the Vampire Lord's demeanor nagged at him a sense of constraint that seemed at odds with his obvious power. Near dawn. Though time was difficult to track in the windowless chamber, exhaustion finally overcame him. As he drifted towards sleep, fragments of the conversation echoed in his mind. The Black Moon is a harbinger. What follows may consume us all. The blood remembers. He woke with a gasp, his heart pounding. The chamber was unchanged, the runes still glowing their steady blue, but Tuma's mind was racing with sudden clarity. "The blood remembers," he whispered. Moving to the wall, he pressed his palm against one of the larger runes, an ancient symbol representing containment. The blue light pulsed beneath his touch. During his weeks of captivity, Tuma had studied the runic array thoroughly. He had recognized the Dwemhar origins, but something about their configuration had always seemed odd, slightly misaligned, as though adapted by someone who understood the principles but not the subtleties of the original magic. Now, with fresh insight, he began to see the pattern. The runes weren't just containing him, they were containing something else, something that required a steady drain of magical energy to remain stable. The vampires weren't just keeping him prisoner, they were using him as a battery. He closed his eyes, extending his senses into the magical currents flowing through the runes. Yes, there it was, a thin stream of power being siphoned away, following a path that led down toward the cavern where he had met Elria, toward whatever the vampire lord truly fears. Moving methodically around the chamber, Tuma examined each rune in sequence, tracing the flow of power. The pattern was complex, but not impenetrable. With careful analysis, he began to identify nodes where the flow could potentially be disrupted. But disrupting it would mean releasing whatever was being contained, a risk he couldn't take without understanding what that might be. He needed more information. 3 days, Vesria had said. 3 days to consider Illyria's offer. 3 days before they would demand his answer, and likely force his compliance if he refused. Tuma returned to his journal, sketching the runic array and noting the flow patterns. If he could redirect the energy rather than simply blocking it, he might be able to create an opportunity without releasing whatever lay below. Hours passed as he worked, testing small manipulations of the magical currents. The runes were resistant to change, but not immutable. With the right pressure at the right points, his concentration was broken by the sound of the chamber door opening. Quickly closing his journal, Tuma rose to face his visitor. It wasn't Vesria this time, but one of the Ikarn guards. A tall, pale figure with the remnants of elven features distorted by vampiric transformation. He carried a silver tray bearing a single cup. "Lady Vesria sends refreshment," the guard said, his voice surprisingly cultured for an Ikarn. Tuma made no move to take the offered cup. "I don't recall requesting any." "It is not a request, but a necessity," the guard replied. "Your audience with Lord Elria depleted your reserves. The runes require sustenance." So his theory was correct. They needed him strong enough to feed the magical containment, but not strong enough to break free. "What is it?" Tuma asked, eyeing the cup suspiciously. "A restorative, herbs and essences to replenish magical energy." "No blood, I hope." The guard's lips twitched, in what might have been amusement. "We save that for more willing converts." Tuma accepted the cup cautiously. The liquid inside was clear, with a faint amber tint, smelling of mountain herbs, and something sharper beneath. "Lady Vesria also instructed me to inform you that she will visit tomorrow to discuss your considerations regarding Lord Eluria's proposal." "How thoughtful of her," Tuma said dryly. The guard lingered a moment longer than necessary, his red eyes studying Tuma with an intensity that seemed at odds with his servile role. "The choice is more complex than it appears, Archon," he said finally, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "Not all paths lead where they seem." Before Tuma could respond, the guard bowed slightly and withdrew, the door sealing behind him. Tuma stared at the closed door, turning the strange comment over in his mind. Was it a warning? Advice? Or simply another layer of manipulation? He examined the cup again, debating whether to drink its contents. They wouldn't poison him, not when they needed his magical energy. But the restorative might contain other elements, subtle compulsions perhaps, to make him more amenable to Illyria's demands. Setting the cup aside untouched, Teuma returned to his runic analysis. If they believed him weakened, it might provide an advantage. Let them think their containment was secure while he searched for ways to turn it against them. As night deepened in the world above, Teuma worked tirelessly, testing minute adjustments to the magical flows. Each small success brought him closer to understanding the full system, and closer to the realization that breaking it would require more power than he could safely channel in his current state. Unless he glanced at the cup, the restorative would indeed strengthen him, making any attempt at manipulation more effective. But it would also alert his captors that he was operating at full capacity. At a calculated risk, then, taking up the cup, he studied its contents once more. Then, making his decision, he drank half. Enough to show consumption without fully accepting whatever effects it might contain. The effect was immediate. Warmth spread through his limbs, and the familiar tingle of magical energy coursed along his spine. Whatever else it might contain, the restorative was potent. With renewed strength, Teuma returned to the runic array. Now he could sense deeper patterns, currents beneath currents, all flowing toward the chambers below, and beyond them to something ancient and cold that pulsed in rhythm with the distant black moon. The connection was there, the reason for Elia's urgency. Whatever lay beneath Mornathil was linked to the black moon, drawing power from it, growing stronger as the celestial event progressed. And the vampires were containing it, not destroying it, but containing it. Why? The answer came to him like a cold whisper. Because they couldn't destroy it, because it was part of them, or they were part of it. The Black Moon wasn't empowering the vampires. It was empowering something else. Something the vampires feared more than all the armies of elves, humans, and dwarves combined. Teuma worked through the night, carefully redirecting tiny threads of magical energy, creating a pattern that mirrored the original, but with one crucial difference. When activated, it would reverse the flow, sending the accumulated power back into whatever lay below. Not enough to break the containment entirely, but enough to create a disruption, a moment of chaos he might use to his advantage. By dawn, or what he judged to be dawn in the sunless depths of Mornathil, the framework was complete. Now he needed the right moment to activate it. Vesria would come today. She would expect an answer to Elria's proposition, and he would give her one, just not the one she anticipated. He concealed his journal and sat in the center of the chamber, adopting a meditative pose. To any observer, he would appear to be deep in contemplation, exactly what they would expect from an Archon, considering a momentous decision. Hours passed. The restorative's effects gradually faded, leaving Teuma tired but focused. When the chamber door finally opened to admit Vesria, he was ready. "You look rested, Archon," she observed, gliding into the room. "I trust the accommodations continue to meet your needs." "As much as any prison can," Teuma replied, rising to face her. Vesria's eyes flicked to the half-empty cup. "I see you accepted our hospitality." "Wise choice." "Necessity, as your guard explained." She circled him slowly, her movements fluid and predatory. "Have you given thought to Lord Ellier's proposal?" "I have thought of little else." "And your answer?" Teuma met her gaze steadily. "I will need to see the artifacts first, to verify that what Elria seeks is indeed there." Asteria's perfect features registered surprise before smoothing into practiced neutrality. "Lord Elria offers you the salvation of your city, and you respond with conditions?" "I respond with practicality," Teuma countered. "If what he seeks isn't there, or has been moved, my cooperation becomes meaningless." "You doubt Lord Ellier's knowledge?" I doubt the completeness of blood memories pieced together over centuries, Teuma said, especially regarding artifacts that were deliberately hidden even from most elves. Isria considered him, her head tilted slightly. You're stalling. I'm being thorough, Teuma corrected. If Lord Elria truly wishes my assistance, he will understand the necessity of verification. She stepped closer, her cold presence raising goosebumps on Tuma's skin. And if he agrees to this verification, you will help him access the artifacts? If what he says is true, if the knowledge within can prevent greater devastation, then yes, I will consider it. It wasn't a lie, precisely. He would consider it and then reject it, but only after gaining access to whatever transportation magic they would use to reach Sailmarg. Vesria studied him for a long moment. I will convey your response to Lord Elria. She turned to leave, then paused. You should know, Archon, that my lord's patience is not infinite. The Blackmoon's influence grows daily. Soon, certain options will no longer be available to us. What options? Teuma asked. Bethrian's smile was cold. Mercy, for one. After she departed, Teuma returned to his runic preparations. If Iluri accepted his counter-proposal, he would need to be ready to move quickly. The redirected energy would create only a brief window of opportunity. And if Elria refused, then Teuma would have to attempt a more desperate strategy. He didn't have to wait long for an answer. Less than an hour later, the chamber door opened again. This time, both Vesria and the strangely articulate Ikarn guard entered. Lord Elria has considered your request, Vesria announced without preamble. He agrees that verification is reasonable, given the circumstances. Teuma kept his expression neutral, though inwardly he was surprised by the quick capitulation. Either Alaria was more desperate than he appeared, or this was another layer of deception. When do we depart? He asked. Immediately, Vesria replied. Preparations have already been made. She gestured to the guard, who approached with a set of silver manacles. A precaution, she explained. The journey requires passage through certain sensitive areas of Mornathil. Teuma allowed himself to be bound, knowing resistance would only raise suspicion. The manacles were cold against his skin, and he could feel enchantments woven into the metal, dampening spells to further restrict his magic. This way, Vesria directed, leading him from the chamber. The corridors beyond seemed different this time. Darker, more oppressive. The walls themselves appeared to pulse gently, as though the very stone were breathing. Teuma realized they were taking a different route than before, deeper into the mountain rather than toward the cavern where he had met Elria. Where exactly are we going, he asked. To the portal chamber, Vesria replied. Mornathil has connections to various locations throughout Taria, including one near enough to Selmark for our purposes. Convenient. Necessary, she corrected. The sun limits our movements above ground. Tunnels and portals allow us to circumvent such inconveniences. They descended a twisting staircase that seemed to spiral endlessly downward. The air grew colder, heavy with the scent of old stone and something else, something metallic and bitter. Back to blood, old blood, soaked into the very rock. At the bottom of the staircase, they entered a long hall lined with alcoves. Each alcove contained a stone sarcophagus, their lids carved with the likeness of their occupants. Vampires in repose, their features aristocratic and cold. The first court, Vesria explained, noticing Teuma's glance. Those who followed Lord Elria from the beginning, before the elves drove us into shadow. They're dead? Sleeping, she corrected. Conserving strength until they are needed again. The implication was clear. The forces they had faced so far were only a fraction of the vampire's strength. If these ancient ones awakened, at the end of the hall stood an archway carved from black stone, its surface inscribed with runes similar to those in Teuma's prison, but arranged in a different configuration. Beyond it lay a circular chamber with a raised platform at its center. The portal nexus, Vesria said, gesturing for Teuma to step onto the platform. As he did so, Teuma felt the familiar pull of portal magic, a distortion in the fabric of space that would allow instantaneous travel across vast distances. But there was something wrong with this portal. The energy patterns were chaotic, almost feral, lacking the precise mathematical structure of Elven or Dwemer transportation spells. This isn't a true portal, he realized. It's a shadow path. Vesria's eyes narrowed. Observant, Archon. Yes, we travel through the spaces between realms. What your kind would call the veil. Less stable than your portals, but beyond the reach of your wardings. The Akarn guard positioned himself behind Teuma while Vesria stepped onto the platform beside him. She produced a small crystal vial filled with black liquid. Remain still, she instructed, uncorking the vial. Shadow paths require... She poured the liquid onto the platform where it spread in an intricate pattern, flowing into channels carved into the stone. As the pattern completed, the air above the platform began to shimmer and darken. Teuma felt the magical currents shifting around him. This was his moment. With subtle movements masked by the natural sway of the portal's activation, he sent a pulse of energy through the runic network he had prepared in his cell. Deep below them, something responded, a tremor that rippled through the mountain's foundations. Vesria glanced down sharply. What was... The tremor intensified, becoming a violent shudder that shook dust from the ceiling. The Akarn guard stumbled, bracing himself against the wall. The containment, Vesria hissed, her composure cracking. How? Another surge, stronger than the first. The portal's dark energy flickered and swirled erratically. Teuma seized his chance. Channeling power through the silver manacles, he overloaded their dampening enchantments. The metal grew hot, then shattered, releasing a flash of energy that knocked Vesria backward. Free of his restraints, Teuma immediately raised his hands, drawing sigils in the air. The chaotic portal energy responded to his commands, stabilizing into a more controlled form. The Akarn guard lunged forward, but Teuma was faster. With a gesture, he flung the guard across the chamber where he crashed into the sarcophagi, sending ancient dust billowing into the air. Vesria recovered quickly, her beautiful features contorting into something feral and inhuman. She leapt at Teuma, moving with preternatural speed, but he had already completed his spell. The portal surged, engulfing Teuma in darkness. He felt the nauseating twist of shadow travel, like being pulled through a space too small for his body, and then he was falling, tumbling through nothingness. The landing came suddenly, painfully. He struck hard ground, rolling across rough stone, before coming to rest against something solid. For a moment, he lay stunned, gasping for breath in air that tasted of pine and night mist. Above ground, he had made it out of Mornathil. But where? Gathering his strength, Teuma pushed himself to his feet and surveyed his surroundings. He stood on a forested hillside. Below, through gaps in the trees, he could see the dim lights of a settlement. In the distance rose the familiar silhouette of the Crescent Mountains. He had emerged somewhere in northern Taria, far from Salmark, but free. A rustling in the brush behind him snapped Teuma to alertness. He spun, summoning what magical energy he could muster after the draining escape. From the shadows emerged the Akarn guard. From the portal chamber, his pale features ghostly in the moonlight. Teuma raised his hands, ready to defend himself, but the guard made no move to attack. Instead, he slowly removed his helmet, revealing features that, while vampirically altered, retained a distinctly elven cast. "Peace, Archon," he said quietly. "If I meant you harm, I would have struck while you were recovering." "Who are you?" Teuma demanded. "Once, I was Celerin of the Starfall Legions," the guard replied. "Now, I am something else. But not entirely their creature, despite appearances. A spy," Teuma realized. Working for whom? Celerin's lips twitched in what might have been a smile. Let us say there are interests within Sailmark that wish to maintain awareness of Elria's activities. You've been imprisoned for months, then years, Celerin corrected, though my transformation is relatively recent. A necessity to maintain my cover. Teuma studied him warily. Why reveal yourself now? Because what you witnessed in Mornathil changes everything. The threat beneath the mountain, what Illyria fears, is far worse than we anticipated. What is it? Celerin glanced up at the night sky where the black moon hung ominously among the stars. Not what, but who. The mother, progenitor of Illyria himself. The first vampire. Though that term scarcely encompasses her nature, Teuma felt cold dread settling in his stomach. Illyria is containing his own creator? Why? Because she would consume everything, including her own children. The black moon awakens her, just as it strengthened Illyria. But where he seeks dominion, she seeks only consumption. And the artifacts beneath Selmark, what do they contain that could help against such a threat? A weapon, I believe, Celerin replied. One of the few artifacts the Dwemhar created specifically to combat the darkness of the void, the realm from which the mother originally emerged. Teuma processed this information, fitting it into the pattern of Illyria's actions. So his attack on our lands is both conquest and desperate strategy, Celerin finished. He needs the weapon to ensure the mother remains contained, but his pride will not allow him to simply request aid from the mortal races. So he conquers, hoping to seize what he needs before it's too late. And if he fails, if the mother breaks free, Celerin's expression grew grim, then vampires will be the least of our concerns. A distant howl echoed through the forests, the hunting cry of Ikaran trackers. They've discovered your escape, Celerin said. You must reach Sailmark, warn the high archons of both threats. And you? Teuma asked. I returned to Mornathil to maintain my position. The intelligence I provide may be our only advance warning if the worst comes to pass. Teuma hesitated, then reached out, clasping Celerin's arm in the traditional warrior's grip. May Etha's light guide your path, even in darkness. And yours, Celerin replied, returning the gesture before stepping back. Now go. The Rangers of the North maintain a watch post 2 leagues south of here. They will help you reach Sailmark. With a final nod, Celerin vanished into the forest, leaving Teuma alone on the moonlit hillside. For a moment, the Archon stood motionless, his mind racing with implications. Then, hearing another distant howl, he set off down the hillside, his steps swift and determined. His path ahead was fraught with danger, Ikarn patrols, vampire lords, treacherous terrain, but he carried knowledge that could change the course of the war. Knowledge of both the enemy's weakness and a threat greater than any had imagined. As he moved through the silent forest, Teuma cast a final glance at the black moon, understanding now its true significance. Not merely a celestial event or a source of vampire power, but a harbinger of ancient darkness, a darkness that threatened all life, mortal and vampire alike. The Rangers of Taria would need this knowledge. The elves of Salmark would need it. All the free peoples of the world would need it, if they were to survive what was coming. And so Teuma ran, bearing the burden of terrible truth, as the shadows of Mornathil receded behind him and the uncertain future of Taria unfolded before his determined steps. Above, the black moon watched, patient, implacable, its influence reaching across the land like tendrils of ancient night. Awakening that which should never have been disturbed. The war for Taria had only just begun.
Chapter 2. Ranger Company. The rain fell in sheets, turning the forest floor into a treacherous mire. Teuma pressed onward, his worn boots sinking ankle-deep with each step. 3 days had passed since his escape from Mornathil, and the vampire pursuers had not relented. Every rustle in the underbrush, every shadow that moved against the wind, set his nerves on edge. He paused beneath the shelter of a massive oak, its ancient branches offering momentary respite from the downpour. The ranger outpost Celerin had mentioned should be close now, if it still existed. If the vampires hadn't already overrun it, if Celerin's information had been genuine. So many uncertainties, and the fate of Taria hanging in the balance. Teuma closed his eyes, drawing a steadying breath. The restorative the vampires had given him had long since worn off, leaving him exhausted and magically depleted. Without the steady drain of Mornathil's containment runes, his power was slowly returning, but not quickly enough to face a Nikarn hunting party. A twig snapped behind him. Teuma spun, hands raised in preparation to channel what little magic he could muster. A dark figure emerged from the rain-soaked underbrush, bow drawn, an arrow aimed directly at his heart. "Don't move, elf," came a gruff voice. "State your business in the borderlands." Relief flooded Teuma's weary body. A ranger. Not a vampire. The hooded figure wore the mottled green and brown leathers of the northern rangers, though mud and rain had rendered them nearly black. "I am Teuma, High Archon of the Starsong Circle," he replied, keeping his hands visible. "I seek sanctuary with the rangers of the north. I bear urgent news from Mornathil." The ranger did not lower his bow. "Convenient. An elven Archon, wandering alone in vampire-infested territory, claiming to have been inside their stronghold. I escaped 3 days ago," Teuma explained. "I was held prisoner for nearly a month." "And yet you live," the ranger observed skeptically. "The vampires aren't known for letting their captives walk free." Teuma smiled grimly. "They didn't exactly give me permission to leave." Before the ranger could respond, 3 more figures materialized from the rain-streaked forest, all with weapons trained on Teuma. Their leader, a weathered woman with a scar running from temple to jaw, studied him through narrowed eyes. "Captain Ira," one of the rangers addressed her. "This one claims to be an Archon from Starsong." The captain approached, her gaze never leaving Teuma's face. "If you're who you claim to be, you'll understand why we can't simply take your word for it. These woods have seen too many shapeshifters and thralls in recent weeks." Teuma nodded. "A reasonable precaution. I submit to whatever verification you require." Captain Ira produced a small crystal vial from a pouch at her belt. Inside, a pale blue liquid shimmered with faint luminescence. "Silver water," she explained, uncorking it. "Blessed by the priests of Etha, it burns vampire flesh like acid and reveals their thralls through pain. A useful tool in these dark times," Teuma remarked, extending his hand. Ira poured a small amount of the liquid onto his palm. The silver water pooled there momentarily, then absorbed into his skin with a brief, cool sensation. Nothing more. The captain nodded, some of the suspicion leaving her eyes. "That's one test passed. Now, if you are truly an Archon..." She gestured to one of her companions, who produced a small cloth bundle. Unwrapping it revealed a smooth river stone, etched with a single rune. An identification stone, Teuma recognized, attuned to elven magic. "You aren't magic specifically," Ira corrected. "A gift from Sailmark to our order, to distinguish friend from foe. If you are what you claim, you can activate it." It sounded true. Teuma took the stone, feeling its resonance with his own depleted magical reserves. Concentrating, he channeled a thin stream of power into the rune. The stone warmed in his hand, the etched symbol glowing with soft golden light. Ira's posture relaxed. "High Archon Teuma," she said, offering a formal bow. "Forgive our caution. These are dangerous times." Caution keeps you alive, Teuma replied, and I bring news that will demand even greater vigilance. The rangers exchanged glances. Then we should return to the outpost. Era decided. It's not far, and you look as though you could use rest and a proper meal. Teuma couldn't argue with that assessment. The days of flight had taken their toll. His robes tattered and his body pushed to its limits. Lead on, Captain, he said. But we must be swift. What I learned in Mornathil cannot wait. The ranger outpost was not what Teuma had expected. Rather than a structure built upon the earth, it existed within it. A network of caves and tunnels extending into the heart of a hillside, concealed by a waterfall and dense vegetation. No vampire would willingly enter running water, making the entrance a natural defense. Inside, the caves opened into a series of chambers, warmed by carefully vented fires. Maps covered one wall, marking known vampire movements and suspected strongholds. A dozen rangers moved about the space, cleaning weapons, preparing meals, or tending to injuries. It's not sale, Mark, Era said, noticing Teuma's appraisal, but it serves our needs. More importantly, the vampires haven't discovered it yet. She led him to a small chamber set apart from the main activity. A rough-hewn table dominated the space, surrounded by stools carved from tree stumps. A fire crackled in a stone hearth, driving away the damp chill. Rest, she instructed, gesturing to a pallet in the corner. Food will be brought shortly. Then we'll hear what drove an Archon to flee through vampire territory alone. Teuma sank gratefully onto the pallet, his muscles aching from days of constant movement. I'll rest when Sailmark knows what's coming, he said. Bring your lieutenants. What I have to say concerns all the free peoples of Taria. Era studied him a moment longer, then nodded. As you wish. While she gathered her officers, Teuma closed his eyes, allowing himself a moment to center his thoughts. The images from Mornathil remained vivid. Elria's obsidian throne, the black pools, the pulsing presence beneath the mountain that even the vampire lord feared. The mother. The young ranger brought a wooden bowl of hearty stew and a cup of something warm and slightly bitter. A stimulant tea, Teuma recognized, popular among the border patrols for its ability to keep one alert through long night watches. He accepted both gratefully. By the time Era returned with 4 other rangers, her senior officers judging by their bearing, Teuma had finished the meal and felt his strength beginning to return. The tea worked its way through his system, clearing the fog of exhaustion from his mind. These are my lieutenants, Era introduced them. Vorin, Kal, Mira, and Tennis. They command our scouting parties and have seen more vampire activity than most. Teuma acknowledged each with a respectful nod, noting the hardness in their eyes. The look of those who had witnessed too much horror and lost too many companions. The border regions had borne the brunt of the vampire resurgence. What I tell you now must reach Salmark with all haste, Teuma began. I was captured during the ambush at Silverash Ford 4 weeks ago and taken to Mornathil. For most of that time I was kept in a runic prison, visited only by Lady Vesria of the Vadir Lords. We know Vesria, Vorin, a grizzled man with a patched eye, growled. Her hunting parties have slaughtered 3 border villages in the past month. Teuma nodded grimly. 3 days ago, I was granted an audience with Elaria Sonia himself. This revelation brought a stunned silence. The name of the vampire lord was spoken only in whispers, even among the battle-hardened rangers. You saw him? Cole, the youngest of the lieutenants, asked in disbelief. The actual lord of all vampires? I did, and what I learned from that meeting changes everything we thought we knew about this war. Teuma leaned forward. The vampire's aggression isn't merely conquest. They're desperately seeking something, something they believe is hidden beneath Salmak. What could be so valuable? Mira, a severe woman with close-cropped hair, asked. A weapon, Teuma answered, created by the Dwemer to combat a threat from beyond our world, a threat that Elria himself fears. He explained what he had learned about the containment beneath Mornathil, about the entity known as the Mother, about the connection to the Blackmoon. As he spoke, the ranger's expressions shifted from skepticism to grave concern. Are you suggesting we face two threats? Ira asked when he had finished. The vampires and this Mother? For now, only one, Teuma clarified. Elria and his forces are containing the Mother, but the Blackmoon strengthens her just as it empowers the vampires. If she breaks free, then we're all dead. Tennis, who had remained silent until now, concluded. Vampire and mortal alike. Precisely. Vorin spat into the fire. Why should we believe any of this? Could be vampire trickery, meant to distract us from their true purpose. I considered that possibility, Teuma admitted. But there's more. I had help escaping Mornathil from an infiltrator placed within Elria's forces. He told them about Celerin, the transformed elven spy who had revealed the true nature of the threat. As he described their brief interaction on the hillside, he noted the skepticism returning to some of their faces. A vampire spy working for our side? Cal shook his head. Seems convenient. The transformation changes the body, not necessarily the soul, Teuma countered. Celerin retained enough of himself to aid me, at great personal risk. His information aligns with what I observed myself. Captain Aira had moved to the map wall, studying the marked territory. If what you say is true, she said slowly, then Mornathil is more vulnerable than we thought. Elria divides his forces between conquest and containment. A strategic weakness. Mira agreed, joining her at the map. We must exploit, Teuma said, rising to stand beside them. But first, I must reach Selmark. The High Archons must know what lies beneath their city, and what Elria seeks. Era traced a route on the map with her finger. The direct path is too dangerous. Vampire patrols have increased tenfold since your escape. They're hunting you specifically. I suspected as much. Teuma sighed. But, she continued, there's another way. Underground passages used by the dwarves before the war. They connect to the old trade routes beneath the Crescent Mountains. From there, you could reach the outskirts of Salmark without surfacing. How soon can we depart? Teuma asked. Aira exchanged glances with her lieutenants. We? She echoed. I need an escort, Teuma explained. My magic is returning, but slowly, and my knowledge of the underground ways is limited. My rangers have other priorities, Ira said firmly, like stopping the vampire advance before it reaches the settlements south of here. Teuma studied the map closely, noting the patterns of vampire activity. A plan began to form in his mind. Audacious, perhaps even foolhardy, but potentially effective. What if we could do both? He suggested. Deliver me to Selmark and strike a significant blow against Elria's forces. Vorin snorted. How do you propose we accomplish that? By attacking Mornathil directly? The declaration hung in the air, met with stunned silence. Then Vorin barked a laugh, harsh and disbelieving. You want us to attack the vampire stronghold? With what army? Not an army, Teuma corrected. A small, elite force. Not to conquer, but to disrupt. Illyria divides his attention between conquest and containment. If we threaten the containment directly, he'll be forced to recall troops from the border regions to secure Mornathil. Giving the settlements a reprieve, Mira murmured, considering. And creating chaos we can use to cover our journey to Salmark, Teuma added. Ira frowned. You're asking us to risk rangers on what amounts to a diversion. I'm asking you to consider a strategy that could save thousands of lives, Teuma countered. If the mother breaks free, or if Elria obtains the weapon beneath Sailmark, no border outpost will matter. The rangers exchanged glances, a silent communication born of years fighting together. Finally, Ira turned back to Teuma. We will need more than vague plans if we're to attempt something this dangerous, she said. Tell us everything you remember about Mornathil's defenses, its layout, its weaknesses. Leave nothing out. Teuma nodded, reaching for a piece of charcoal to sketch the fortress's structure on the map table. As he began to draw, the rangers gathered around, faces grim but determined. The first step toward reclaiming Taria from the shadow had begun. Chapter 3. Dark Spy. Deep within Mornathil, Vesira paced the obsidian floor of her chambers, rage radiating from her like a physical force. 3 days since the Archon's escape, and still no sign of him. The Ikarn hunting parties had tracked him to the edge of Ranger territory before losing his trail. Failure was not tolerated in Lord Elria's court. Already 2 of her personal guards had been executed as examples, their blood feeding the containment runes that had been damaged during Teuma's escape. The door to her chambers opened without announcement. Only one being in Mornathil would dare such an intrusion. My lord, Vesria said, composing herself and bowing deeply. Ilaria Sonia entered like a shadow-given form, his movements liquid and almost imperceptible. He had abandoned the simple garments he'd worn during the Archon's audience for more traditional robes, black as the void, embroidered with silver runes that seemed to shift and crawl across the fabric. The Archon eludes our hunters, he said, his whisper voice filling the room like a cold mist. It wasn't a question, so Vesperia didn't treat it as one. He had help, she said instead. The disruption in the containment runes was too precisely timed, too expertly executed. Someone guided him. A traitor within Mornathil, Ilria concluded. His black eyes revealed nothing, but the temperature in the chamber dropped perceptibly. Interesting. I have begun interrogations, Vesria assured him. Every Ikarn who had contact with the Archon, every thrall who served in the lower levels, someone will break. Time is a luxury we no longer possess, Elia replied, gliding to the window that overlooked the vast underground cavern where Mornathil's armies gathered. Below, hundreds of Ikarn warriors prepared for the next offensive, their pale forms moving with mechanical precision. The mother stirs more strongly with each passing night. The Blackmoon's influence grows. The containment holds, Vespia pointed out. Even with the Archon's tampering, the seals remain intact. Barely, Perlaria corrected. And with his escape, our window to secure the weapon beneath Saelmark narrows. The elves will be warned. Then we must strike now, Vesria urged, before they can prepare. Our forces are already committed to the northern campaign, Elria cut her off, and must remain so, lest the other houses sense weakness and challenge my authority. This was the complex reality of vampire politics that few outsiders understood. Elria's position as lord of all vampires was maintained through a delicate balance of fear, power, and tradition. The other vampire houses, the Vadir, the Kresh, the Morfend, and others, followed him out of self-interest as much as loyalty. Any sign of failure could trigger challenges to his rule. What would you have me do, my lord? Vesria asked, careful to keep her tone neutral. Elria turned from the window, his gaze falling on her like a physical weight. Find the traitor. Begin with the god who accompanied you to the portal chamber. Celerin, was that his name? Vesria concealed her surprise. She had not mentioned Celerin specifically in her reports of the incident. Yes, my lord. One of the converted elves from the southern campaign. Bring him to the interrogation chambers, Elria commanded. I will attend personally. This was unprecedented. Lord Aleach rarely involved himself directly in such mundane matters as questioning a god. Whatever suspicions he harbored must be significant. "At once, my lord," Vesria replied, bowing again as Illyria departed as silently as he had come. When she was certain he had gone, Vesria summoned her personal attendant, a thrall who had once been a nobleman from Taria before being broken to her will. "Find Celerin," she ordered. "Bring him to the Black Chamber. Tell no one else of this command." As the thrall hurried to obey, Vesria moved to a concealed panel in her chamber wall. Behind it lay a small alcove containing a crystal sphere. She passed her hand over it, murmuring words in the ancient vampire tongue. The sphere clouded, then cleared to show an image. The containment chamber deep beneath Mornathil, where the mother was held. The massive crystalline structure pulsed with dark energy, the runes surrounding it flickering erratically. Within, a shape moved. Fluid, formless, yet somehow conveying an impression of hunger so vast it made even Vesria uncomfortable. The damage Teuma had caused was worse than she had reported to Elria. The containment wasn't merely weakened, it was beginning to fail. The Archon's tampering had accelerated a process that had already begun with the Blackmoon's appearance. Vesria dismissed the image with another gesture. If Elria discovered she had withheld this information, her existence would end in the feeding chambers. But she needed time to implement her own plans. Plans that required the chaos of the mother's imminent awakening. Let Elria focus on the traitor and the weapon beneath Sailmark. Vesria had her eyes on a different prize. Celerin moved through the lower halls of Mornathil with practiced efficiency, his guard's uniform granting him access to areas forbidden to most of Elria's servants. Since aiding Teuma's escape, he had been careful to maintain his routine, avoiding any behavior that might arouse suspicion. But time was running short. The containment would not hold much longer, with or without the Archon's tampering. When it failed, chaos would follow. Chaos he intended to use for his own escape. He paused at an intersection, listening. Footsteps approached, too many for a routine patrol. Ducking into a side passage, he pressed himself against the wall as a group of elite Icarn guards marched past, led by Vesria's thrall. They were searching for someone, and given the intensity of the search and the presence of Vesria's personal servant, that someone was likely him. His cover was blown. Celerin considered his options. The passage he currently occupied led deeper into Mornathil, toward the old sections where even Elria's influence waned. The tunnels there connected to ancient cave systems, some of which might offer routes to the surface. It was his best chance. Once they discovered he was missing from his post, every exit would be watched. Moving silently, Selene headed deeper into the mountain, away from the regularly patrolled areas. The architecture changed as he progressed, becoming more organic and less structured. These portions of Mornathil predated even Elria's arrival, carved by beings whose nature was lost to history. After several tense minutes of navigating the twisting passages, Celerin reached a chamber he had discovered during his early explorations of the fortress. Circular, with a high domed ceiling, its walls were covered in carvings that depicted beings of shadow-consuming stars. In the center of the floor, a deep shaft descended into darkness. Celerin had never ventured down it, deterred by the cold dread that emanated from below. But now, with pursuers behind him, it represented his only option. He was preparing to descend when a soft voice froze him in place. "I wondered when you would return to this place." Vesria stood in the chamber entrance, alone and unarmed. Her perfect features were composed in an expression of mild curiosity, as though discovering a trusted god attempting to flee was a minor annoyance rather than treason. "Lady Vesria," Celerin said, straightening and offering a formal bow. "I was conducting a security sweep of the old tunnels." "Of course you were," she replied, stepping into the chamber. just as you were performing your duties when you helped the Archon escape." There was no point in denial. Celerin abandoned the pretense, his posture shifting from servile to alert. "How did you know?" "I didn't," Vesri admitted, "but Lord Elria suspected. He remembers you, you see. From before. From Silmar. This was unexpected." Celerin had been careful to avoid direct contact with Illyria during his infiltration, working through intermediaries and staying within the lower ranks. "I've never served in Sailmark," he said carefully. "Not served," Vesria corrected. "Observed. Lord Eldray glimpsed you during the battle at Twin Rivers, among the Archon's escort. A face like yours is difficult to forget, even centuries later." Celerin's hand moved to the short sword at his belt. "If you knew, why wait until now to confront me?" "Because you were useful," Vesria replied, circling the chamber with languid steps. "A channel through which we could feed false information back to your masters. Why do you think your reports were allowed to reach Sailmark?" This revelation struck Celerin like a physical blow. Had his entire mission been compromised from the start? Had every piece of intelligence he'd smuggled out been exactly what Elria wanted the elves to know? "You're lying," he said, though doubt crept into his voice. "Am I?" Vesria smiled. "Consider how easily you infiltrated our ranks. How conveniently you were assigned to guard the Archon. How readily you found escape routes that should have been sealed." She was closer now, moving with the predatory grace of her kind. "We've been playing a longer game than you realize, Celerin of Sailmark. Or should I say, Celerin of the Shadow Watch. The name of the Elven Intelligence Network, spoken so casually in the depths of the vampire stronghold, confirmed Celerin's worst fears. His cover hadn't merely been blown. It had never truly existed. If I had been compromised from the beginning, he asked, why allow me to help Teuma escape? Because Lord Ellery wished it, Vesria replied. The Archon carries exactly the information we want, delivered to Sailmark. Enough truth to be believed, enough deception to serve our purpose. The weapon beneath the city, Celerin realized. It's not what Elria claimed? Vesria's smile widened. Very good. No, the artifact isn't a weapon against the Mother. It's a key. One that will allow her complete awakening once removed from its resting place. Then Teuma's unknowingly leading you right to it, Celerin concluded, horror dawning as he grasped the full scope of the deception. Precisely. Even now, he races towards Sailmark, bearing urgent warnings that will convince the High Archons to retrieve the artifact, either to use it against us or to move it somewhere safer. Vesriel's laughter echoed in the chamber. The moment they disturb it, the Mother's binding weakens. When they attempt to employ it, the binding shatters. I have to warn him, Celeron said, drawing his sword. Even if it costs my life. Oh, it will, Vesria assured him, her beautiful features beginning to shift. The mask of humanity fell away, revealing the true face of a Vadir Lord. Skin stretched tight over an elongated skull, eyes like pools of blood, mouth filled with needle-sharp teeth. But first you'll tell me everything about the Rangers' movements along the border. Lord Elia may have his grand strategy, but I have my own interests to protect. Celerin raised his blade, knowing it would provide little defense against a vampire of Vesvia's age and power, but he would not die cowering. I will tell you nothing, he said. We shall see. She moved faster than mortal eyes could track, crossing the chamber in a blur. Celerin managed to slash once with his sword, the enchanted blade leaving a smoking gash across Vespia's arm before she knocked it from his grip. Her hand closed around his throat, lifting him from the ground with inhuman strength. Celerin struggled, his vampiric transformation granting him more resilience than an ordinary elf, but still no match for a Viver Lord. Your dual nature fascinates me, Vesria said, studying him as he gasped for air. Neither fully vampire nor truly elven any longer. I wonder what secrets your blood holds. Her fangs extended, sharp as daggers and dripping with black venom. Celerin knew what came next. Not a quick death, but a slow draining that would extract every memory, every secret from his blood, even as his consciousness faded. With his last reserve of strength, he drove his hand into his belt pouch, fingers closing around a small crystal vial. His final contingency. Vesria noticed the movement too late. What are you? Celerin smashed the vial against her face. Silver water blessed by the priests of Aether, splashed across her perfect features. Vesria shrieked, a sound so piercing it shook dust from the chamber ceiling. Her grip loosened as she clawed at her burning flesh, giving Celerin the opportunity to break free. He dove for the shaft in the center of the chamber, knowing his chances of survival were minimal, but preferring the unknown darkness to Vesria's vengeance. As he fell, her screams followed him, echoing down the ancient passage into the heart of the mountain. Vesria's rage would ensure that no corner of Mornathil remained unsearched, but it would also divert attention from the real threat, Teuma's mission to Sealmacht, and the terrible deception he carried with him. Chapter 4. The Fortress. 5 days after Teuma's arrival at the Ranger outpost, the attack on Mornathil was ready. Captain Ira had assembled a force of 40 Rangers, her most skilled fighters and scouts, armed with weapons specifically enchanted against vampire physiology. Silver-edged blades, arrows tipped with blessed iron, and vials of silver water made up their arsenal. Tubes Teuma had spent the intervening days recovering his strength and helping plan the assault. His detailed knowledge of Mornathil's layout proved invaluable, allowing the Rangers to target the most vulnerable areas of the fortress. Remember, he instructed them as they gathered in the main chamber of the outposts. This is not a battle we can win through conventional means. Our goal is disruption. Specifically, targeting the containment systems that keep the Mother imprisoned. Releasing an ancient evil seems counterproductive, Cal remarked, checking his bowstring. Not releasing, Teuma corrected. Threatening. Elria fears the Mother above all else. If he believes her containment is at risk, he'll recall forces from the border to secure Mornathil. And while they're scrambling, Ira continued, our main force will strike at the vulnerable outposts along the western ridge, pushing the vampire line back from the settlements. It was a gamble, but a calculated one. By the Rangers' estimates, nearly a third of Uria's forces were deployed along the border regions, with the remainder divided between Mornathil itself and smaller strongholds throughout the conquered territories. What about you, Archon? Vorin asked. You'll be in the thick of it, guiding us to these containment runes, and then continuing to Saulmark with a smaller escort once the distraction is underway, Teuma confirmed. The knowledge I carry must reach the High Archons, regardless of what happens at Mornathil. The Rangers nodded in solemn understanding. Many of them did not expect to return from this mission, but the stakes demanded the risk. We move at dusk, Era declared. The vampires are strongest at night, but so is their overconfidence. They won't expect an attack on their home territory, especially not from a force as small as ours. As the Rangers made their final preparations, Dumawa withdrew to a quiet corner of the outpost. From a hidden pocket in his tattered robes, he retrieved his journal, the same one he had used to record his observations in Mor Nathiel. Flipping to a fresh page, he began to write. Should this journal be found after my death, let it be brought to Archon Lyria of the Star Song Circle. The threat we face is greater than vampire conquest alone. The Blackmoon heralds the awakening of the being known as the Mother, progenitor of all vampires and a creature of the void itself. Illyria Sonia fears her power, keeping her contained beneath Mor Nathiel even as he wages war on the mortal realms. Beneath Sailmark lies an artifact of Dwemha origin, one Illyria believes can be used against the Mother. I journey there now to warn the High Archons and secure this weapon before it falls into vampire hands. But I harbor doubts. The information came too easily, offered by Elria himself during our audience. Could this be part of a greater deception? The vampire lord is ancient and cunning, with schemes that span centuries. If I do not reach Sailmark, let those who find this journal exercise extreme caution regarding the artifact. It must be studied thoroughly before any attempt to use or move it. The balance between light and shadow has never been more precarious. Teuma closed the journal, securing it once more in his robes. The doubts had been growing since his escape, small inconsistencies in Elria's behavior that suggested hidden motives. But without more information, he could only proceed with the plan they had formed. As the last light of day faded from the cave entrance, Captain Ira approached, her face solemn beneath the war paint that darkened her features. "It's time, Archon," she said. "The scouts have found a path to Mornathil's western tunnels. Old mining shafts that connect to the lower levels. If your maps are accurate, we can reach the containment chambers with minimal confrontation." Teuma nodded, rising to join the assembled rangers. "Then let us bring some chaos to Lord Elria's ordered world." The approach to Mornathil took them through abandoned dwarven mines that predated the vampire occupation of the mountains. These tunnels, narrow, low-ceilinged, and treacherous, had been deemed too small and inefficient for the vampires' use and sealed off from the main fortress. But the rangers, experts in navigating difficult terrain, found the points where the old mines intersected with Mornathil's expanded network. Using tools designed for silent excavation, they broke through the sealed entrances, infiltrating the vampire stronghold undetected. Teuma led the way through the dark passages, his elven sight augmented by the small amount of magic he could now channel. Behind him came Era and 10 of her best fighters, while the remaining rangers split into smaller groups to target other vulnerable points throughout the fortress. "We're close," Teuma whispered as they reached a junction where the rough-hewn mineshaft met the more finished stonework of Mornathil proper. The containment chambers lie 3 levels below, accessible through a series of spiral staircases near the throne room. "Gods?" Era asked, her voice barely audible. "Almost certainly," Teuma replied, "but fewer than you might expect. Elria relies more on magical wards than physical sentries for his most important spaces." "And can you bypass these wards?" Vorn asked skeptically. "Some," Teuma admitted. "Others will have to trigger and deal with the consequences." The rangers exchanged glances, their expressions grim but determined. They had known this mission would be dangerous, perhaps suicidal, from the beginning. "We proceed as planned," Era decided. "Mira, take your team and set the distraction in the eastern armory. The rest of us will follow the Archon to the containment chambers." The rangers moved with practiced silence, navigating the dark corridors like shadows themselves. Twice they were forced to neutralize Ikarn sentries, using specialized darts tipped with a compound that rendered vampires temporarily paralyzed. Long enough to dispatch them with silver blades across the throat. As they descended deeper into Mornathil, the air grew colder and heavier with ancient malice. The walls themselves seemed to pulse with a slow, patient heartbeat. A sensation that made even the hardened rangers uneasy. "We're entering the older sections now," Teuma warned in a hushed tone. "These passages predate Elria's occupation. The magic here is different." "Different how?" Era asked, her hand resting on the hilt of her sword. "Less controlled," Teuma explained. "More primal. The deeper we go, the closer we come to where the Mother is contained." They reached a vast circular chamber with numerous passages branching outward like the spokes of a wheel. At the center, a spiral staircase descended into darkness, its steps carved from some black stone that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. "The containment chamber lies at the bottom," Teuma said, pointing to the staircase. "But we won't need to go all the way down. The control runes are housed in that alcove." He indicated a recess area across the chamber, where faint blue light emanated from symbols carved into the wall. The patterns were similar to those that had adorned Teuma's prison, but vastly more complex. Layer upon layer of magical constraints, some so ancient their purpose was no longer remembered. "How long will you need?" Era asked, signaling her rangers to take defensive positions around the chamber. "Minutes only," Teuma replied. "I don't intend to break the containment. Just destabilize it enough to trigger the alarms. Once Elia realizes the mother's prison is threatened, he'll have no choice but to respond." As Teuma approached the runic alcove, a distant explosion shook the fortress. Dust and small fragments of stone rained from the ceiling. "Mira's team," Era said with grim satisfaction. "Right on schedule." The distraction would draw attention away from their position, giving Teuma the time he needed to work on the containment runes. Already they could hear the sounds of movement from the upper levels. Ikarn guards rushing to investigate the explosion. Teuma placed his hands against the runic wall, feeling the complex weave of magic that sustained the mother's prison. The power flowing through it was immense, far greater than he had anticipated. Whatever lay at the bottom of that spiral staircase was not merely contained, but suppressed, its true nature compressed into a space too small to accommodate its full horror. With careful precision, Teuma began to manipulate the energy flow, creating small disruptions in the pattern. It was delicate work, like unpicking individual threads from an ancient tapestry, without causing the whole to unravel. "Hurry," Vorin urged, his bow trained on one of the passages where shadows had begun to move. "We've got company." The first of the Akarn appeared at the entrance to the chamber. Not gods, but elite warriors, their pale bodies encased in armor of black chitin that seemed to grow directly from their flesh. They moved with unnatural speed, weapons raised. The rangers' arrows flew with deadly accuracy, finding the gaps in the vampire's armor. Several fell, but more poured in behind them, their inhuman shrieks echoing through the chamber. "Keep them back," Era commanded, drawing her twin short swords and engaging the nearest Ikarn. The silver-edged blades left smoking furrows in vampire flesh, but the creatures fought with the desperation of those defending their most sacred ground. Teuma worked faster, sweat beating on his brow as he forced more power into the disruption. The runes began to flicker, their steady blue glow interrupted by pulses of angry red. Nation below. Something stirred. A tremor ran through the floor, and from the depths of the spiral staircase came a sound. Not quite a voice, but a pressure against the mind that formed words without sound. "Free me?" Teuma faltered, momentarily overwhelmed by the alien presence. This was no mere vampire, not even one as ancient as Elria. This was something older, vaster, a consciousness that had existed in the void between stars before life took root on Taria. "Archon!" Ira's shout pulled him back to the present. She stood over two fallen Ikarn, her blades dripping with dark ichor, but more enemies pressed into the chamber from multiple passages. "Whatever you're doing, finish it now." Teuma renewed his efforts, channeling more of his recovered magic into the disruption. The runes flared brightly, then dimmed, their pattern broken in multiple places. Warning symbols ignited along the walls, bathing the chamber in crimson light. "It's done," he called, stepping back from the alcove. "The containment is destabilized. Elleria will know within moments." As if in response to his words, a new presence entered the chamber. Not an Icarn warrior, but a figure of terrible beauty and grace. Vesria stood in the main entrance, her perfect features marred by half-healed burns down one side of her face. Her eyes blazed with hatred as they fixed on Teuma. "A traitor's accomplice," she hissed, her voice carrying even over the sounds of battle. "I should have killed you when I had the chance." "Fall back," Aura ordered, recognizing the threat posed by a Vadir lord. "Form defensive positions." But Vesperia didn't attack immediately. Her attention shifted to the flickering containment runes, and something like fear crossed her features. "What have you done?" she demanded, taking a step toward Teuma. "Do you have any idea what you've unleashed?" "Nothing yet," Teuma replied, backing toward the ranger's position. "Just a warning of what might happen if Elria continues his war against the mortal realms." Vesriel's laughter was cold and cutting. "You fool! You've played directly into his hands." Before Teuma could question her meaning, another explosion rocked the fortress. Closer this time, violent enough to crack the chamber floor. One of the rangers lost his footing and tumbled toward the spiral staircase, only to be pulled back at the last moment by his comrades. "That wasn't part of our plan," Era said, concern evident in her voice. "No," Vesria agreed, her posture changing from aggressive to alert. "Those are siege weapons. Someone attacks Mornathil from the outside." A third explosion, and part of the ceiling collapsed, blocking one of the chamber entrances. The fighting paused as both vampires and rangers sought to avoid the falling debris. In the momentary lull, Teuma sensed a shift in the magical currents flowing through Mornathil. The fortress defenses were activating, but in a pattern he hadn't observed during his captivity. Not a response to external threat, but a systematic shutdown. "It's an evacuation protocol," he realized aloud. "Elria is abandoning Mornathil." Vesria's expression confirmed his assessment. "The foolish rangers think they found our weakness," she said bitterly. "Little do they know. They are serving Lord Elia's grand design." "What design?" Teuma demanded. "What does he gain by retreating?" Instead of answering, Vesperia gestured sharply. The remaining Icarn immediately disengaged from combat, falling back to form a protective circle around her. "We'll meet again, Archon," she promised, her burned face twisting into a grotesque smile. "When the Mother rises and Elria's true plan comes to fruition, perhaps then you'll understand the role you've played in your own destruction." With that, she and her guards retreated down one of the still open passages, moving with the fluid grace of their kind. Hera started to order pursuit, but Teuma held up a hand. "No," he cautioned. "Let them go. Something else is happening here, something beyond our understanding." The tremors continued, growing stronger. From above came the sounds of battle. Shouts, explosions, the clash of weapons. It seemed the Rangers' small attack had coincided with a much larger assault from an unexpected source. "What now?" Vorin asked, helping a wounded comrade to his feet. "We complete our mission," Teuma decided. "The path to the eastern tunnel should be clear now. We can make our way out while the fortress is in chaos." Hera nodded in agreement. "Tennis, take 5 rangers and escort the Archon to the rendezvous point. The rest of us will gather what intelligence we can and follow." Teuma began to object. "No arguments." Ira cut him off. "Your knowledge must reach Sailmark. That's the priority now." Reluctantly, Teuma acknowledged the wisdom of her decision. If the fortress was indeed being evacuated, valuable information might be left behind. Information that could help in the broader war against the vampires. As Tennis and his small team led Teuma toward the exit, another violent tremor shook the chamber. From the depths of the spiral staircase came that voice again, stronger now. So, Chapter 5, Flight. The journey through Mornathil's collapsing tunnels was a nightmare of falling stone, magical discharges, and desperate encounters with fleeing vampires. Twice, Tennis and his rangers were forced to fight their way past Icarn guards, attempting to block escape routes. By the time they reached the eastern tunnels that would lead them out of the mountain, only 3 of the original 6 rangers remained with Teuma. "The exit should be just ahead," Dennis said, his voice tight with pain from a wound in his side. "The old dwarven outpost connects to a series of caves that emerge near the Silver River." Teuma nodded, conserving his strength. The manipulation of the containment runes had drained his recovering magical reserves, leaving him physically exhausted. But there was no time to rest, not with Mor Nathiel literally crumbling around them. As they approached the final tunnel junction before the exit, raised voices echoed from ahead, too many for their small group to confront directly. Tennis signaled for silence, then carefully peered around the corner. "The Veer Lords," he whispered, pulling back. "At least 3, with a full contingent of elite Icarn. They're securing the exit." "Is there another way out?" one of the other rangers asked. Tennis shook his head. "Not that we know of. This was our primary escape route." Teuma closed his eyes, extending his senses into the surrounding stone. The magical currents within Mornathil were in chaos, barriers falling and ancient wards activating in seemingly random patterns. But beneath that chaos, he detected something else. A more orderly withdrawal of power, as though someone was systematically shutting down the fortress's magical infrastructure. "They're sealing the passages," he realized. "Once they've evacuated, they intend to collapse the entire tunnel network, burying whatever secrets remain. Including us," Tennis said grimly. Teuma studied the rough-hewn ceiling of the tunnel, an idea forming. "Not necessarily. These outer tunnels were dwarven-made, correct?" Dennis nodded. "Mining operations from before the war. They should follow standard dwarven excavation patterns," Teuma reasoned, "including emergency air shafts." Understanding dawned on the Rainers' faces. Dwarven mining operations always included vertical shafts to the surface, both for air circulation and as escape routes in case of cave-ins. The nearest one would be, Dennis consulted his mental map, 2 junctions back, in the storage area. Then, that's our new exit, Teuma decided. We go up and over, rather than trying to push through the Vigil blockade. They backtracked quickly, alert for any signs of pursuit. The tremors continued, growing more violent, and in the distance they could hear the distinctive sound of stone passages collapsing. The storage chamber was larger than Teuma had expected, a cavernous space filled with crates and barrels, likely supplies for the vampire forces. And there, in the far corner, half hidden behind stacked supplies, was the outline of a vertical shaft, narrow but navigable. "Good eye, Archon," Tennis remarked, already moving to clear the access. "This hasn't been used in years, but the dwarves built to last." As the rangers worked to open the shaft, Teuma investigated some of the crates. Most contained mundane supplies, weapons, armor, preserved food for the thralls and other servants who required sustenance. But one section was different, a collection of sealed black containers marked with runes of warding. Curious, Teuma carefully opened one. Inside lay scrolls and codices, their pages covered in script so ancient he could barely recognize it. These were artifacts from Mor Nathil's archives, historical records, magical treatises, perhaps even accounts of the mother's original binding. "Dennis," he called. "We need to take some of these with us." The ranger looked dubious. "We're barely going to make it out ourselves, Archon. Extra weight could be fatal." These may contain answers we desperately need, Teuma insisted. About the mother? About Elria's true plans? After a moment's consideration, Tennis nodded. 1 container each, no more. Teuma selected the most promising scrolls, packing them carefully into the smallest container. As he worked, his fingers brushed something cool and crystalline at the bottom. A data crystal of the type used by ancient elven archivists to store vast amounts of information. He pocketed it without comment. Whatever secrets it contained, they would be better examined in the safety of Salmark. Shaft's clear, one of the rangers reported. It's a tight fit, but passable. I can see starlight at the top. The ascent was grueling, a vertical climb up rough-hewn handholds that had weathered centuries of disuse. The rangers went first, securing ropes to aid those who followed. Teuma came last, the container of scrolls strapped to his back and his depleted body protesting every movement. As he climbed, the tremors intensified. Dust and small stones rained down from above, and the shaft itself seemed to flex and shift around him. Mor Nathiel was dying, its ancient structures failing under some coordinated attack, or perhaps under the strain of the mother's increasingly unstable containment. Finally, after what seemed like hours, Teuma emerged onto the mountainside under a night sky brilliant with stars. The black moon hung low on the horizon, its malevolent presence a reminder of the darkness still to come. The rangers had already established a defensive perimeter and were surveying the landscape below. What they saw explained the sounds of battle they had heard within the mountain. An army besieged Mornathil. Not rangers or elves, but humans from the southern kingdoms. Their campfires stretching across the valley floor in ordered rows. Siege engines, massive, catapults and ballistae, were positioned around the mountain's base, launching projectiles at various entrance points. Men of Sevilla, Tennis said, awe in his voice. They've finally joined the war. But how did they locate Mornathil? One of the other rangers wondered. Its position has been hidden for centuries. Teuma had a suspicion, one that chilled him despite the night's warmth. They were meant to find it, he said quietly. This is part of Elria's plan. He's abandoning Mornathil deliberately, making it appear as though the human armies have won a great victory. While he does what? Dennis asked. I don't know, Teuma admitted. But I intend to find out. He patted the container of scrolls. These may hold answers. From their vantage point, they could see movement along the mountain's lower slopes. Dark shadows flowing like liquid between the rocks, moving away from the human army's position. The vampire forces were retreating, using hidden paths known only to them. We should alert the human commanders, one of the rangers suggested. Tell them they're striking an empty fortress. No, Teuma countered. Let them believe they've won. It will boost morale across the free lands, and perhaps cause Elria to underestimate his opponents. Tennis nodded in agreement. Besides, our priority remains getting you to Salmark. The rendezvous point with Captain Era is a day's journey east near the Crystal Falls. And if she doesn't make it out of Mornathil? Teuma asked. The ranger's expression remained stoic, but his eyes revealed his concern. Then we continue without her. She would expect nothing less. As they prepared to move out, a final, massive tremor shook the mountainside. Looking back, they saw the main entrance to Mornathil collapse in a cloud of dust and debris. One by one, the other known entrances followed suit, sealing the fortress from the outside world. But Teuma's heightened senses detected something else. A subtle shift in the magical currents flowing through the mountain. Not destruction, but reconfiguration. Mornathil wasn't being destroyed, it was being transformed. its energies redirected towards some new purpose. "It's not over," he murmured, turning away from the spectacle to face the long journey ahead. "It's only beginning. This is the end of part 2. Thank you for listening. Be sure to subscribe to make sure you don't miss any release from J.T. Williams and the Dwimhar Realms.